There is a U.S. territory, it's fairly obscure, called Saipan. It's a relic of the Second World War, but it has been part of an American territory called the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. It is not so far from Guam, which is probably the nearest place that most people have heard of. Administratively, it's kind of similar to Puerto Rico, and it's had a kind of troubled economic history, never really finding an industry that makes sense to keep its economy going. But a few years ago, it entered an agreement with a Chinese company to construct a huge casino, really massive, a kind of Macau-sized development out there in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific. And after that, things got pretty weird. I'm Matthew Campbell. I am a reporter for Bloomberg Businessweek. I wrote a story called Paradise Bought, all about the investment of a Chinese casino on the island of Saipan. Actually, what had happened was a colleague of mine in Asia who covers the casino business had heard of this place because the company that was operating this casino, called Imperial Pacific, based in Hong Kong, was reporting its numbers to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And the numbers that were being put up in Saipan were absolutely astonishing, in the billions per month, at a casino that was on this island truly in the middle of nowhere. Imperial Pacific is actually a little bit mysterious in its origins. We know that it is controlled by a mother and son from Harbin in northern China. And they are very wealthy, certainly. They seem to have earned their money initially on the mainland in a number of businesses, particularly real estate. And then they came to Macau, where they got involved in what are called junkets, which are these mechanisms by which Chinese nationals gamble in Macau and often, as another consequence of that, are able to move money out of the country. So when Saipan began looking to whether a casino could be the answer to its economic problems, Imperial Pacific showed up and very quickly won approval and a very generous deal to construct this casino and to then operate it without paying a great deal in tax. There was a big problem from the beginning of Imperial Pacific's project in Saipan, which was that no one had ever built anything this large there. This is an island of small buildings. It's kind of like a quiet American suburb. And here was this Chinese company proposing to construct a Vegas or Macau-sized installation right in the middle of the city center of Saipan's largest town. So they needed workers, and where did they find those workers? Well, it turned out many of them, and this was something that was investigated by the U.S. federal government, were tourists, were Chinese nationals who had entered on tourist visas into Saipan and had then gone straight to work at the construction site. I spoke to one person who had worked as a site supervisor there in charge of implementing safety rules, who said that it was the most difficult project he'd ever worked on because basic safety requirements were not being followed. And sure enough, there were a great deal of injuries. There was one death that was documented, and things actually got so bad that at the hospital in Saipan, the doctors were keeping a kind of unofficial spreadsheet listing injuries from workers from the site to keep track of how many patients they were seeing who had been hurt while working to build this casino. So while I was in Saipan, I went, and with the help of a colleague who translated, to see some of these construction workers who were living in a sort of dormitory, barracks-like structure not so far from the casino. They were angry. They were claiming they had not been paid, that they had been injured and not properly treated, and really just aggrieved in every respect.
These workers were employed by a series of contractors that Imperial Pacific had hired to build its casino.
Imperial Pacific has said that it is in full compliance with all of these rules, that any issues, for example, around immigration and illegal labor being used on the construction site, these things are being done without its knowledge. They have also said that safety violations, again, were either done without their knowledge or that the site has complied with all the relevant safety rules. Imperial Pacific, of course, needed someone to actually run this casino, and I think it's fair to say it needed an American face. It needed someone who could operate natively in an American context. And so it hired a guy called Mark Brown, who had cut his teeth actually in the Trump organization, in Trump casinos. So he was kind of in the Trump orbit. He's someone who has described Trump as a mentor, as someone who was very influential in his career.
We realize that we are guests here. You know, we're investing in the island, into the Chamorro culture that's here. We're guests, so we're very honored and privileged to be here, and we will be here for many, many years to come.
Brown was the person running it. He was the face of it, appearing at meetings, doing interviews with the local papers. However, he eventually left. He then came back, and then I believe he left again, and he's now no longer with the company. One of the things that got me interested in this story was this astonishing list of big-name Washington political figures who Imperial Pacific had managed to collect over the years as board members in some cases, advisors in other cases. You had David Paterson, a former governor of New York. You had Ed Rendell, former governor of Pennsylvania. You had Jim Woolsey, who ran the CIA, Louis Freeh, who ran the FBI. One of the things that really struck me as I reached out to some of these people was that they hadn't done much due diligence. Rendell, for example, told us that essentially his assistant had Googled Imperial Pacific and done a bit of online reading, and he'd concluded from that that this was an okay assignment for him to take and an okay check for him to take. It's probably safe to say they were hired to provide a degree of air cover, that if you have people with these big names on the payroll, they can help you stay away from any regulatory or legal problems. Pretty much all of these figures eventually stepped down from these roles, but they were for a long time associated with this company that had really serious questions about its operations and its activities and its influence in this U.S. territory. As part of my reporting, I came across a guy called Mike Neto, who was a maritime consultant in Singapore, who had been hired to move one of Imperial Pacific's yachts from Saipan back to Asia. And he was doing this normal assignment, and then the yacht encountered mechanical trouble in the Philippines. So he slowed down to see if he could get some help, and was then approached by the Philippine Coast Guard. It appears that Imperial Pacific had reported the vessel stolen. And as a result, Mike and the yacht were impounded in a small city in the Philippines, and he was stuck on board for a few days, not permitted to leave. And while he was on board, he could see through surveillance cameras as three men appeared and started removing what appeared to be big bricks of US cash from the yacht. And I asked him repeatedly if he was sure these were bricks of US cash, and he said they absolutely were. He actually reviewed the footage a few times to be sure. Now, it should be pointed out, Imperial Pacific has said this is not true, and that the yacht was attacked by pirates. Obviously, Mr. Neto disagrees with that. So this was just another very strange, alarming thing that happened in the orbit of this casino. From the beginning of the casino story in Saipan, which goes back to about 2013, there was a lot of support from the current governor, Ralph Torres, who is from one of Saipan's big political families. There were interesting questions about why the governor came to support the casino. When a casino was initially being considered for Saipan, he was in the Senate, he actually voted against it. Then, over time, as I learned and was able to document through my investigation, there had emerged significant financial links between the governor's family and Imperial Pacific. His three brothers run a law firm. Imperial Pacific actually had that law firm on the payroll and paid it quite a lot of money. There had been land deals with people who the governor was related to obtain long-term leases on land around the island. And just a general sense that this company and this administration were incredibly close and aligned in their interests. Imperial Pacific has said that they have complied, that they have not broken any rules, and that they are operating just as any company in the United States should. Governor Torres has said repeatedly, including in a recent statement, that he has never benefited improperly from the presence of the casino or from Imperial Pacific, that his brothers have not benefited improperly, that any land deals have not resulted in funds flowing to him.
I have a duty to do and to continue what I am voted for. And I just respect the process.
Without Governor Torres, without support from his allies in the legislature, I think it's fair to say that Imperial Pacific would not have been able to act in the way that it has over the last several years. This is a company that has repeatedly failed to live up to the commitments that it made in its initial agreement with the government of Saipan, which stipulated it would construct a certain number of hotel rooms by a certain date, that the casino would be up and running, that it would pay a certain amount of tax over time. Many of those commitments have not been met. And yet the island's government and its regulatory body, which is called the Commonwealth Casino Commission, has just continued extending it rope, continued allowing Imperial Pacific to operate, asking it to make good on these promises, but not really enforcing anything. And obviously the license has not been canceled.
Located in the heart of Saipan is the Villas at Imperial Palace, in addition to the Seoul Casino on Saipan. The villas opened up 2 months ago, with 6 completed and 8 on the way. Currently, the finished villas are
Imperial Pacific had become really the most important force on this island by a huge margin. It was dominating the economy, it was dominating politics, it was building a structure larger than anything the island had ever seen, and it was doing all of these things in ways that had people there and people in the industry and people on the US mainland very concerned about corruption, about safety, about crime, and about whether this island could become a hub for money laundering or other activities that it shouldn't be.
At 5 p.m. yesterday, the Federal Bureau of Investigation agents executed one of their multiple search warrants and opened the doors of Imperial Pacific International CNMI's main office. This comes after FBI agents raided CNMI Governor Ralph Torres' office, vehicle, and home, as well his brother's law firm, Torres Brothers, LLC. CNMI administration...
Something is happening in the criminal justice system. Whether that leads to charges, and if so, against whom and for what, we still don't know. But this story has some way to run.